Hi guys, today we're going to be making a still life drawing. And a still life drawing is a drawing that is comprised of inanimate objects. I can never say that word. I can't believe I just said it correctly the first time. So inanimate objects are objects that don't move. So it's great for a first drawing because you don't have to worry about things like shifting around as you're trying to figure out how to draw them. There's a couple reasons why it's great to do a still life drawing when you're just beginning to develop your skills. One, it helps you learn how to draw and render shapes into like three-dimensional forms. And it also gives you immense practice to develop really hard drawing techniques like sighting and measuring proportion. So this video is going to show you how to begin doing a still life drawing, how you break it down, how you measure proportions, and then how you can draw the rest of the objects in proportion to one another. So it's a challenging technique that takes a lot of practice. So if your first drawing does not turn out good, do not tell yourself that you're not good at drawing. It's all about looking at every drawing that we make and seeing how we can improve for the next one. So one artwork never marks who you are as an artist. It just marks where you are in your process as becoming a better artist. So let's begin and have fun making some happy accidents.
First step, whenever you're drawing a still life, is you have to analyze your subject matter, whether that be a photo or a still life that's set up in front of you. Anytime I begin looking at my subject matter, I always pay attention to the positive and negative shapes. The positive shapes are the objects in the work. So here, it's the apples and the cloth. The negative shapes are the areas around the positive shapes. So that's going to be everything in the background. Now, whenever we look at positive and negative shapes, it gives us information in how things relate to one another. So I can start seeing that, all right, the distance between these two apples is much wider than the distance between those two apples. The height of this cloth is almost a similar height of the height of that apple. So by pausing and looking at the sizes of things prior to starting helps you set up for success, because if you want to be a better drawer, you have to learn how to see better. So you're not going to see better unless you give yourself time to see first. Whenever I start drawing, I usually use a 4H pencil, mainly because it makes a lighter mark, but I realized that you guys can't see what I'm drawing. So I stopped and then I grabbed a 2B pencil, which makes a darker mark so you could see. And that is a lot better. Thank you. Now, I am generally drawing in the objects. So this is the second step. You need to drawing your objects general to specific. So the best way to draw it generally is to break each object down into simple shapes. So for this first apple, I broke it down into a circle. And then I'm pulling down the rest of the apple with that bottom shape to fill in the rest. Before I started drawing the second apple, I analyzed where it's starting in relation to the first apple I've already drawn. I also like to take my pencil and I like to drag it over the image to see if I can get that movement of that angle in there so I can draw a more accurate angle when I'm generally drawing out the still life drawing. And I'm constantly looking back to the photograph to determine where things should be placed. Because the most important step is the first one we did, which is always analyzing your subject matter. Here's a free tip to follow. You really should be looking at your still life or your photograph or reference photo 80% of the time and only glancing back at your paper 20% of the time. The biggest mistake beginning artists make is looking at their drawing too much and forgetting to go back and looking at the source. We easily get caught up in the familiarity of these objects. I mean, we're all used to seeing apples. We know what apples look like, so we think we know how to draw them. But if we really want them to look realistic, we have to be paying attention to every specific apple. Which brings us to our third step, measuring proportions. We want our apple to be in the same proportion to the apple in our still life. And we get objects to be in the same proportion by comparing the width to the height. Sorry for my head in there. So we're going to rewind. I'm going to show you exactly what I just did. So I'm taking my pencil and I'm measuring the widest point of the apple. Once I found that measurement, I'm going to see how many widths create the height. Now there's one width and a little bit extra. I'm going to slow that down a little bit more because this can be a complicated step to understand. So first with your pencil, you're going to be measuring the widest point of your apple. And then you're going to shift your pencil vertically to see how many widths create the height. Beginning drawers, though, can get really confused whenever they go to draw the objects because they're drawing most likely the objects at a different scale. It doesn't matter how big or small your drawing is in relation to your still life or your photo, whatever you're drawing. As long as the proportions stay the same, your drawing is going to look accurate. So for example, we have a smaller apple on the right. Here is the same width line that I measured on the left. However, because it's a different scale, my proportions are going to be the same, but a different size. So I'm going to scale it down to where I'm at that widest point again, and then I'll see how many widths create the height, and notice that the gap below the yellow line to the bottom of the apple is exactly the same. My proportions are exactly the same. The only thing different is that the measurement of the proportions are slightly smaller than the bigger one because the scale is different. Since I know my apple is drawn in proportion, I can move on to the fourth step, which is sighting your angles.
Okay, so quick disclaimer, I know I'm working at a little kid's table and that's just because it has the best lighting for the video right now. I promise I have my own table. But for sighting, what you want to do is keep your arm nice and straight. You want to actually have your elbow locked and you're going to take your pencil and line it up to the edge of the object. Keeping your arm straight and your pencil firmly in place, then you're going to slightly shift your body over to see how the angle of the pencil matches the angle of your line. If your line is off in your drawing, then just adjust it to match the angle that the pencil was at. The reason why you want to keep your elbow nice and locked in and straight is because watch what happens to my pencil. When I change my elbow and when I unlock it, the angle of that pencil has changed. So by keeping my elbow locked and just shifting my body over from my photo to my drawing, that helps me keep things more accurate. Artists do this all the time, even if they're drawing a still life. Like you'll see artists going like this, and all they're doing is they're lining their pencil up to an object that's in front of them, and then they're taking that sighting angle and comparing it to the drawing that they have in front of them. So try this technique. It's going to feel weird if this is the first time you've done it, but if you want to get better at drawing, this is a great technique that I would recommend using.
So take your pencil, line it up to the edge of your object, get that angle, and then mark it in. It can be hard to determine how to sight something that is a rounded object. So I break it down into these angled lines, which takes us back to that first step of your drawing general to specific. I'm generally putting in the angles of the apple before I specify the contours by going around it at the very end to make it a nice fluid outline. So far, I have only spent my time drawing this one apple, and I've done that for a purpose. I am trying to perfect this object, so all of my other objects are going to be in proportion to this perfected one. So the success of my drawing is all going to be determined by how successful I've drawn this beginning object. Meaning, I need to sight and measure the proportions of everything in the object. So even for the stem, I have to figure out where it's actually starting inside of it. So I had measured that it's about a third of the way down. So I'm just modifying that third in my drawing until I get that right measurement. And once I do, then I start putting in my stem. Okay, now I'm going to get real with you here for a second. I stunk at drawing this stem. I mean, like, it was bad. I had to cut out a lot of this stupid stem and how bad it was drawn because it was ruining everything. So the stem and I are not friends, but I fixed it. So we're going to jump forward. I just want to let you know that if you're ever struggling on your drawing, it happens to the best of us. So once you have that first object in perfect proportion and all of the angles are sighted and accurate, then you can start measuring and sighting where the other objects lie based off of that perfect proportion object. So notice I sighted the angle from the left-hand side of the apple to the left-hand side of the upper right apple, and I did the same on the right-hand side. Those extra lines that I drew in are called sighting lines, and I am sighting everything from the stem and up until the left-hand side of the apple. Now, I didn't realize this at the time, but my stem was in the wrong spot, so I kept having problems with my proportion of my apple, and it wasn't until I just took a step back and I reanalyzed everything going back to that first step that I realized that that silly, stupid stem was off again. I'm telling you, like, I hate that stem. And it just goes to show how important it is to make sure everything is in proper proportion, because my stem was not in the right spot and it was ruining the rest of my drawing where things were inaccurately being drawn in. So from here on out, the process just gets to be a little repetitive. You are comparing one object to another, you're measuring its proportion, and then sighting its angles. And hopefully you guys can see the importance of drawing general to specific. If you would have gone in first and drew in all of the details of an object before checking if it was drawn in proportion first, the whole drawing could be off. And then you would have to start all over again, and all of that time spent drawing the detail would have been wasted. So slow down, take your time building a strong foundation, and then do all the fun details at the end.